Today I want to offer an alternate way of playing the hi-hat that you may or may not have ever seen or tried before. I'm going to present and explain a method that prevents your hands from crossing, and I'll explain why it works so well. We'll finish though by talking about an instance or a scenario where you might actually want to cross your hands. This is some pretty interesting, nerdy, ergonomical stuff, so you'll definitely want to hang along for the ride, so let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to The Non-Glamorous Drummer. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Let's go talk hi-hat ergonomics. Really the only reason why we all cross our hands, or we're taught to play that way by default, so that we can play the hi-hat with our right hand, is because all the early drummers were right-handed. Now originally, before the hi-hat as we know it today, they had this thing called a low boy, which was basically a hi-hat but way down low where you couldn't play it with your hand, and at some point they built it higher so you could reach over and play it. And because most people are right-handed, drummers decided, well, it's easier to keep time with that right hand because it's a stronger hand. It's got to play more notes. And with the leading style of music at the time being jazz, and that's what the drum set was really created for, that ride pattern, that swing pattern, everybody could play it much better with their right hand than their left. And so I doubt a lot of guys were really attempting to play open-handed at the time. And so by default, hands crossed, hi-hat came a little bit higher than the snare, and we settled into this. And this has been the default way of playing. There are definitely some pros and some cons to this, and with remote hi-hat pedals, we're able to work around it. If you've got a remote pedal, maybe you can put your hi-hats over here, and still have your pedal here. I've never tried that. Those are expensive. I've always thought that it would be more trouble to try to position my hat somewhere else over here, because I like having it close to the snare anyways, and so I would rather work with what I've got here, and I think that's probably the same boat most of you guys are in. And of course, yeah, you can play open-handed. If you're a lefty playing a right-handed setup, you might play open-handed by default, or maybe you've taught yourself to do it. I've noticed I can scrape by playing open-handed. I've never been a huge fan of it, and I would rather just mainly have my right hand on the hi-hat, although there are instances where I'll put the left hand on there, but I just feel more comfortable kind of keeping my right hand as my timekeeping hand, and I think that's the way most of us are. So I feel like I'm kind of speaking for the majority of us, and so we're all sort of in the same boat with, okay, we got to cross our hands over. I'm getting tired of crossing hands over. I'd rather find a perfect positioning, just because sometimes hands can get tangled up, and that's what's frustrating. So you can see where my hi-hats are at right now. I've got them positioned where they're kind of at 10, 11 o'clock. If I'm facing this way, let's say this was 12 o'clock, yeah, they're at about 10, 10:30. And I like this spot because it allows me to, rather than just play this way, crossed over, I can move out to here and play this way. So I'm going to play for you some examples. I'm just going to play a little, and I'll show you really the pros and the cons of this versus this, and why this works a lot better for me. So right there, as I'm playing that groove, you could see how this stick was clicking against this one when I was trying to play those accented E's and U's, syncopation of the groove. There with the left hand, it was knocking against the right. So changing to this way solves that. Now, if you're playing that same groove much lighter, more like, then it's not a big deal to be crossed over. But when you've got to play something big and loud with a lot of these accents, even if it's not very fast, it just makes sense to get that right stick out of the way. And so any really heavy, sort of syncopated, big, loud rim shot groove like that, I find works best getting this hand out of the way. Now, an immediate con to doing this means that, okay, you've got to move your right hand further out. So that's going to cause the potential to lean forward. That's something that you have to avoid. And really, I found that the closer I can get the hi-hats out over the snare this way before they run into the rack tom or get too far this way, the better, because the less I feel like I've got to lean. So you kind of have to find a new sweet spot on the hi-hat. Rather than it being right here, it's more like right here. So you're hitting it in an angle, but you're making sure you're not slipping off over here, and you're still roughly hitting it with that same spot on the shoulder of the stick. And so as long as the hi-hat isn't too far away, you're not having to reach all the way out. It's not like that, and you're not having to lean too far in. But it is a different kind of feeling that you'll want to spend some time messing around with to make sure that your posture is still good and you're not, leaning in an awkward direction. I think the biggest pro for this kind of position, I guess, this type of hand position, is if you're playing a shuffle or something with quick 16ths on the hi-hat. where it's super easy to get tangled up down here because your stick is, in general, if you're playing something fast, see how close it's staying down here. It's never coming all the way up here out of the way. It's staying down here really close. So in a case like that, where you've got a heavy backbeat or other accented notes, it makes a lot more sense to get that right hand out of the way. I'll show you what I mean. So that works, but I feel like I am having to keep my left hand down here and really put a lot of that wrist into it to play those rim shots. Let's try opening it up to this position. So you get the idea there how suddenly when you move the right hand out of the way, that left hand has a lot more room to work, which is great. And that same thing applies to any other kind of 16th note groove, even if it's not a shuffle, even if it's something that we might encounter more commonly in a lot of straight rock music. Another big pro to that is that when you've got your right hand here, that frees up your left hand to move back and forth very easily between the snare and the hi-hat without sticks getting tangled up. And so I can be playing along and I can play those accents with the left stick here. So it's totally fluid and it just makes sense. And it also makes it easy when transitioning between alternating and just right hand. Just because the sticks stay out of their way. And so I think there's a lot more pros for this than there are cons. Really the only con is the fact that it just feels different. You have to get used to it. So I mentioned at the beginning, what about the specific instance where it might be better to not cross your hands? Well, the times that I think that's the case are when you're not having to play something crazy syncopated, you're playing something lighter, and the goal is just staying quiet and relaxed, or very straight and simple. Let me show you an example of that. And so in that case, there's really no need to do this because we're just playing something basic over here and we're not moving the right hand up here and we're not playing anything fast that's potentially constricting the left hand. So in those scenarios, I'll take the comfort and ease of not having to reach out further over the getting the right stick out of the way, because I feel like it just doesn't have to, it doesn't absolutely have to be out of the way in those slower, simpler scenarios. Hey, I hope this video provided you with something valuable to incorporate into your practicing. If so, be sure to share the video and become a non-glamorous subscriber if you haven't already. Also, before you go, check out the free ergonomics ebook. This booklet breaks down all the basics of kit setup, from getting your snare position just right to having the kick the right distance away and angling the toms. There's all sorts of pictures and diagrams, and I explain all the reasoning, all the whys, the hows and whys behind how I have my kit set up. It's designed to work for any drummer, whether short, tall, beginner, advanced. We can always improve our setup. So it's totally free. Check it out below. I think you'll really dig it and you'll really be able to improve your setup and play much more comfortably. Thanks guys. I'll see you on the next video.